Member of the House Select Committee on Intelligence, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California. Congressman, good to see you this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
You have asked for James Comey. You've called for James Comey to now testify before your committee or somewhere before Congress. Have you formally asked him to appear now?
We have not. There are a lot of committees that have an equity here. Certainly the Intelligence Committee does, but also the Judiciary Committee, the Government Reform Committee. What I'm pleased to see is there is, I think, bipartisan support now to get to the bottom of this. You have Republican Chairman Chaffetz saying that he wants the documents and is prepared to subpoena them. You have Republican chairmen like McCain and Graham who have already extended, at least Senator Graham, an invitation to Director Comey to testify. So I think we can be confident that if these documents exist, Congress will obtain them and that we will hear from Director Comey in fairly short order. And I think that is certainly warranted by the circumstances. The allegations in the New York Times story are very serious. And I think if accurate, require us to probe whether the president was involved in interfering or obstructing the investigation in any way. So we need to get to the bottom of this.
As ranking member on the Intel Committee, Congressman, were you aware of the existence of these memos held by Director Comey in regards to the Russia investigation?
No, and this is the thing that continues to astonish me. Not that I didn't know about these, but we had Director Comey come testify twice before our committee, one in open session last month, another in closed session following that. And who would have expected the need to bring him back to the Congress so quickly? But of course, you know, that's been the course of the last 117 days. But no, I was not aware of either the conversation he described or his aides have described, or that there was a memoranda backing that up.
Congressman, before Director Comey, there was General Flynn. What are the prospects of getting General Flynn before the committee to publicly answer a question like, what did you, General Flynn, tell the president, President Trump, about your conversations with the Russian ambassador?
Well, you know, we could certainly subpoena General Flynn to come in. He has made it quite clear publicly that he would demand immunity in exchange for that. We would certainly need to explore with the Justice Department all of their equities, and I think now the importance of that is even greater than ever. We're not going to want to take any step to impede what the Justice Department may be looking at or deciding to do in terms of whether a prosecution is warranted. We're also going to want to find out, can we get the information we need in any other means? Can we get it from those around General Flynn? Can we get it through other evidence? So all those questions would need to be answered before we could decide whether to go through that extraordinary step of providing any kind of immunity in exchange for testimony.
Adam, good morning. Harold Ford. We had Professor Turley on a little while ago, and he reminded us of the two of you before the Senate several years ago as opposing counsel. And he talked about the elements needed for an obstruction of justice charge, and you would appreciate what would go into that. Two questions. One comment, I like your tone this morning, and I hope Democrats will adopt it and embrace it. We need to stop talking about impeachment and let the facts guide us. But two, what are those elements that would be, in your mind, you'd have to mark off, or thresholds you'd have to reach in order to move forward with an obstruction of justice charge? And two, what questions will you be asking in these hearings, or you hope to be asked, to actually establish this fact pattern?
Well, I think there are, the questions that go to the legal standard, which will mostly revolve around what the president's intent was. Was there a corrupt intent in the conversation he had with Comey? Was he trying to essentially make the investigation of Flynn go away for illicit reasons? The most illicit would be a fear that the investigation might lead ultimately to the president. But then there's a very practical question, and that is in the context of, a potential removal from office. Would the country, would the Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, view the president's conduct as so serious to be disqualifying, or would it be viewed as just a way to nullify the election by other means? That's the ultimate test, I think, as a very practical matter that would have to be met to entertain any consequences that would flow from a congressional finding or belief that there was a criminal or corrupt intent to obstruct the investigation. So at the end of the day, in terms of the questions I would want to ask, I'd like to know exactly what happened in those meetings between the director and the president. I'd like to see memoranda of any conversations they had, particularly, obviously, about anything within the scope of the Russia investigation. But if there were other conversations that the director had that concerned him about the ethics or the legality of what the president was suggesting, even if they involve other subjects, it may shed light on whether his intent here was to corruptly impede or interfere or obstruct the investigation.
Mark Halperin.
Quick questions. One is, if you could ask President Trump one factual question this morning, what would it be? And second, how do you explain Director Comey alleging that this conversation took place several weeks ago, and yet he stayed silent about it until now?
Well, you know, I'm not sure that I could confine it to a single question, but I guess the question would be, what did you say to Director Comey and why? The problem is, of course, we've seen time and time again, we can't rely on the president's answers or representations that are made by his staff because they're contradicted within 24 hours of making the statement. But you're absolutely right. I think one of the important questions that we'll need to ask Director Comey when he comes to testify is, if you thought this was so concerning that you put it into a memoranda and discussed with your top aides the propriety of this, why didn't you bring it to the Department of Justice? Now, maybe a good answer for that. He couldn't bring it to the Attorney General, who had recused himself. The Deputy Attorney General may not have been confirmed yet, so one question would be, who do you bring it to the department? But that is a fully appropriate question to ask the director. You know, the other thing I'll say, to get back to the earlier point, is obviously this whole prospect would be so wrenching to the country. It's not something that we should eagerly embrace in the absence of some very hard evidence. So we need to find out if that hard evidence exists, I think, before we leap to any conclusions.
Well said. Congressman Adam Schiff, ranking Democrat on the House Intel Committee. Congressman, thank you so much.